Servus, this is Matthias Eichler, and this week Thomas Reiss joins Singletrack to share a glimpse into his epic journey from a small town in Germany to opening a design shop in Californian wine country. We talk about running Western states, hiking to Everest Basecamp, and punk music, and great German food, of course. But before we dig in, here are this week's highlights of the Singletrack Holiday Gear Guide. Any holiday gear gift guide for mountain runners obviously needs to feature a pair of running shoes. And the La Sportiva Carousel are my absolute favorite pair of shoes for 2021. I tried a bunch of different shoes to find one I could run really long ultras in, and found this shoe to be the perfect blend between giving my feet the comfort it needs on all-night adventures and still being light and aggressive enough to make me feel confident on mountainous terrains. I love this shoe, and you should check them out at sportiva.com. That's sportiva.com. Next, let me tell you about Bless Well. It's a CBD skincare product line for men by DJ Khalid. Not 100% sure how all this fits together, but I do know that using the products makes my skin go, ah. The scrub doesn't leave my face dried out. The lotion is silky, absorbs into the skin easily, and leaves my face feeling refreshed and clean. The fragrance isn't overpowering, but pleasant, and make me want to use the product regularly. A premium product, but worth the price. Check out blesswell.com to learn more. BLESSWELL.com. This is one of my favorite finds 2 years in a row now. The Bees Wraps food storage wraps. We try to eliminate single-use plastic in our house as much as we can, and these amazing food wrappers help in a lot of ways. Waxy, washable wrappers to wrap any food and replace your cling wrap. Even the ones we've been having for over 2 years in the house and wash them regularly still hold up. The warmth of your hands soften the waxy paper and let it cling tightly around your food containers. They work, they're great, I love them, and you should get some. Save the planet, baby steps. Visit beeswrap.com, that's BEESWRAP.com to learn more. And finally, don't forget to grab your Singletrack shirt and support the show. The products I mentioned in this show and in previous shows can all be found at singletrack.fm/gear. And now, here's Thomas Reiss on Singletrack. Servus, Thomas. Danke, dass du bei mir im Podcast bist.
Ja, danke, dass du mich eingeladen hast, bei dir am Podcast zu sein. Freut mich, besonders durch die Connection, da wir ja beide Einwanderer sind in die USA aus Deutschland, ist es eigentlich ein cooler Startpunkt, bei dir im Podcast zu sein.
It is very much, and I'm going to switch this to English very quickly so we're not losing all our listeners. Indeed, Thomas Reiss also lives on the West Coast, further down south from me. So, but I don't have you on the show just to talk about Germany, even though that would make for a fantastic show for me personally. You are actually a trail runner, and that's how we found each other, probably via Instagram, the way you usually find people. So, you're a trail runner, you are a German, you live on the West Coast, you immigrated a little bit earlier than me. You also have a family, you also have a design studio. You basically sort of my clone, or I'm your clone in some way or another. It is a little bit eerie.
It is, yeah, I would agree on that.
So let's start off by talking a little bit about your trail running. And because you have such a long history, I don't want to go down the full list. There's some fantastic podcasts, which I'm going to be linking in the show notes, that people should listen to in order to get the bigger backstory. But I want to ask you a couple of questions that perhaps open things up. And the first one is, what race, and there are a lot of them, Ultra Sign Up has like over 40 listings for you. What race have you run that you're most proud of?
Oh, Wow, I've never been asked that. That's a really tough question.
Good. I like tough questions.
Wow, that's I mean, there's several. I would say, you can obviously go with like the classic and say, oh, I finished Western States and got my buckle there for, like finished in whatever 20 hours. And Western States is probably 1A due to the name of the race. Plus, I think I was in like sub 18-hour shape, and I had a really rough day, and I wanted to drop at mile 55, and my crew talked me back into it. And then I came back and had like an amazing run between mile 65 and 80, and then completely fell apart and had to really, so definitely proud of that one. I would say that's probably one of them that comes to mind immediately. I'm also very proud. I had a horrible race just like 2 months ago. I ran the Silver Rush 50 miler in Leadville, and I literally had to walk it in on like the last 12 miles. And I had pretty high expectations in that race, and just like the whole 9 yard, like throwing up and all kinds of difficulties. And I was really proud of finishing that just for finishing.
You are a really fast guy. So for me, you're hearing you had to walk it in. I'm, as a back of the packer, I'm saying, well, yeah, that's how I finish all of my races. But you have a little bit of a different expectation on yourself. What race experience was the coolest that you've ever had? What moments that you can recall? Because the interesting way I'm asking these questions is because I feel like sometimes we get bogged down a little bit talking about times and specific races and sort of performances, but what combines all of us, the runners at the front and the one at the back, is sort of these moments that and these reasons of why we run, right? It's sort of, and we all put the bib on, and there are some people that have the expectation of trying to podium, but in general, we are sitting out there, and we are doing this for experiences. So I'm curious, what moments that you've had that I can connect with that doesn't include chasing Walmsley or something.
Yeah, well, I never chased Walmsley. I've been even when I was fast, I was like far away from that sort of fast, But there was like, so I mean, it kind of has to do with being fast. I got selected I represented Germany on the first 2 Trail World Championships. And the second one was in France, and that was really special because I traveled to France, and my brother and one of my best friends came over there for the race to like just hang out, and that was a really special moment being on that level. Even so, the race didn't go that well for me, but just I remember like running down that finishing chute and just like having your home country's national uniform on, that was very special. Just the whole environment. They had like opening ceremonies and everything, and we got the full. It was an Olympic year, so we got actually the full kit, like the people who went to the Olympics, with like warm-up sweats and backpack and everything, and that was really just a very cool moment. Now, obviously, I had to earn my spot into there from being fast. But at that race, I think it was a field of like 80, and I think I got like 50th place or something, So it was like, I was like a middle of the pack guy in that race, And that was really, really, really special moment, I would say, my running career.
So when you ran for Germany, you already lived over here on the West Coast, right? How did they find you?
Well, at that time, there was not that much. Trail running was a really, really new sport in Germany at the time. And I was pretty known because I was like, I think Trail Running Magazine in Germany, which I don't know if you picked up a copy when you were there recently, which by now is a very popular magazine. They had like a 10-page article of me in their like second or third issue. And it was this was kind of when I was like really, really good in trail running, when I would like set course records and win trail races here, like 15 years ago. And so they had this whole article about me, it was like this story, German punk rocker moves to California and now wins trail ultra races there.
So basically living the American dream, right?
Kind of. Without making any money with it, but otherwise, dreaming. And then I think on the following issue, they actually had me on the cover of the magazine, and so that got a lot of attention with like the national team coach in Germany, and so he contacted me and said, "Hey, we're considering you for this Trail World Championship to race for Germany." And I was still a German citizen, so because obviously it has to do with where you're a citizen, not where you're living. Obviously there's plenty of German top athletes that don't live in Germany. And so they invited me for the first Trail World Championships, which were actually in Houston in the US. And then 2 years later, they invited me again for the Trail World Championships in France. And that was just kind of a cool thing, independent from my place or time, just being in that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially growing up in Germany where the Olympics and the national team and putting on a German national uniform meant a lot, is a really big deal. I think in the US, the Olympics obviously are huge, but in general, national sports don't really aspire to the same level of importance as the soccer national team in Germany, right? I mean, every German grows up with that being sort of the pinnacle of fame and aspiration, if you will, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just I grew up playing soccer between age 6 and 10, and that was the ultimate goal. One day be on the national team, and so this was like the next best thing, be on the national team. It wasn't soccer, but it was trail running, but still I was on the national team, a couple of times. So I think that's like one of the coolest experiences, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Beyond racing, your favorite trail you've ever ran on, any distance, anywhere?
Just running for a training run?
Yeah, either for training run or a specific adventure that you set out for yourself.
I would say, so I'm part of this race called the Snowman Race in Bhutan. So Bhutan's a very small country in the Himalayas, and they're putting on a race, and a friend of mine got hired as the race director, and he asked me to be part of the team as the athlete director. And we went there for an exploration trip, and we ran parts of the course, and that was really cool. I mean, we're talking at like running on like think of like Hard Rock 100 kind of a style trail in the Himalayan mountains in Bhutan at 16,000 feet. That was pretty cool. And other than that, I would say one that's accessible that I've been on many times is probably the Flume Trail in Lake Tahoe. It's just beautiful. And I mean, it's like one of the most famous mountain bike trails, I would say, in California, and or Nevada, and that's definitely a very special trail, I would say.
If it's a mountain bike trail, do they allow you on that as a runner?
They have like days off and on where they rotate and stuff. Yeah, but the whole Tahoe Rim Trail is probably one of the most beautiful trails, I would say. Other than that, I love the John Muir Trail. That's like another beautiful trail. The whole whole like Sierra Nevada mountains, between Yosemite and Mount Whitney, that whole area. Any trail there is just beautiful.
It is beautiful in its own right, but how much? And this is a very meta German question. Did you grow up dreaming of California as a German? Was that something that you had in the forefront of your mind? I grew up in the 80s with skateboarding being big and with rock climbing in Yosemite being sort of at the forefront. So this Californian lifestyle was sort of plastered all over my face. So coming over here and then experiencing California and seeing where the marketing sort of fell short and where it really lived up was fascinating to me. Did you experience that too, having lived over in Germany?
Well, with me, so I grew up a little bit like that too, through being in a hardcore band, in like the 80s and 90s. And so for me, it was more about the music. But yeah, I mean, if you talk growing up with like looking at free climbing, then yeah, California is like paradise, right? For me, I mean, there was like a bunch of music scenes, and there was the California scene, with all the bands from like the like San Francisco band area, or the LA scene, but there was also the Boston music scene and the Washington DC music scene, and I liked all those kind of bands. So for me, it was more like I looked up to all the cool American bands, not necessarily from just one spot, So yeah, I always admired that because I always thought it's kind of cool, and those bands are so cool. And
there is something funny that I think we need to explain to Americans, which are most of the listeners of this podcast, which is that as a German, you grew up in, well, it has changed certainly the last few years, but we grew up as a German really sort of believing that America was the promised land. And part of it was marketing, or most of it was marketing. Obviously, Hollywood had a huge impact in that sense that it sort of portrayed the grass is green on the other side. And, if you're young, you don't really differentiate between what is California and what is East Coast and what are other parts of the world. But you watch the movies and the music, the pop culture that comes from America, and you think it's the coolest thing. And where this still hits is if you go back to Germany or you meet another German and they hear that you have moved from Germany to especially the West Coast, and you live here now. I mean, their jaw hits the floor many, many times, right? They're like, whoa, you fulfilled the dream that we've all been dreaming of when we were younger. Do you experience that too, especially when you go back to Germany?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I'm like similar to you. I'm from a small town, and I mean, out of my graduating class, the guy who moved the furthest away is probably like in Munich, so he's like 3 hours away, and people talk about him because he went so far away, because everyone just stays sort of local, and yeah, and with me, I mean, there has been like times like, I remember the first 2-3 times we went to Germany, my wife would like get like a laugh out of it. She would be like, we'll go to the supermarket, and she's like, I think those people over there, they're talking about you, and it was like almost like you're like a celebrity, they were like behind the shelf in the supermarket and pointing at me and kind of like, oh yeah, remember that's Thomas, remember the guy, that little kid, yeah, he moved to America, it was kind of like that, so yeah, definitely has some of that, and obviously I think nowadays it's less of a big deal because the whole world is getting closer with globalization and the internet and all this stuff, like, you have friends in every country through Instagram now. And so I think the whole world is getting closer. So it's not really that big of a deal anymore, I feel. like it used to be maybe 25 years ago when I left Germany, before there was internet and WhatsApp and Instagram and any of that stuff.
And global companies that are
Yeah.
shipping their employees all across the world. So no, I agree with you. It is becoming less, but it was so funny. When we were in Germany a couple months ago, we visited Neuschwanstein, the famous castle. And we, at the bottom, at a little imbiss bude, we bought some fries, and the guy was selling fries. Super thick Bavarian accent and stuff, but typical like Bavarian, like curly mullet, longer hair type guy. And when he sort of figured out that we weren't local because I spoke English with my family and stuff, right? And I told him that I live in the US. I mean, he like almost lost it. He was like, "Oh, dude, Route 66 and stuff." these classic sort of thoughts that Europeans or Germans have when it comes to the great wide open spaces of America.
Yeah. Yeah, there's still some of that going on. I definitely agree on that.
All right, so let's move on to something that's, again, the usual trend of my trail running podcast has nothing to do with trail running, which is you are not a full-time trail runner, even though looking at your resume, you could be, but you're actually, creative director, founder, chief designer of your own design shop, and you're down in California. So you work mainly with the wine industry. So tell me a little bit about Kraftwerk Design.
So, okay, yeah. So, interesting enough. So I had my own business in Germany. That's actually how I met my wife. So I published a running magazine. This was like, 28, 29 years ago. And had a bunch of sporting goods clients, and one of my clients that I got them as a client because they advertised in my running magazine, and then became my biggest client. And they were actually headquartered here in California, and my wife was the operations manager, and I came out here for a photo shoot for them, and that's where I met my wife. And then a couple of years later we got married, and I ended up moving here. And so when I moved here, I sold my running magazine back in Germany. I sold all that off. And then when I moved here, I wanted to find an industry that was local to the area where I'm living, to work in. And the wine industry locally here on the Central Coast was just sort of getting started. I mean, Napa was already a thing, but Napa is like, 4.5 hours, 5 hours north from here. Mm-hmm. And the local wine industry was just sort of getting started. And there was no local design. The local design firms, they all kind of focused on like the typical like stuff, like the bank, the hospital, the, government jobs, Cal Poly University jobs, And so no one really looked into this wine industry. And I grew up in wine country in Rheinland-Pfalz, as you know, big wine country. And before I started my own business, the firm I worked for, we actually did a lot of work in the wine industry. And so it was like, wow, no one takes that serious. And I know a lot about it. My dad worked in a winery. I grew up in wine country. The firm I worked for, we did a lot of wine-related work. So why don't I approach a few of those people and see if I can get some business? And so I did that, and then fairly quickly got some really, really good clients, and so that kind of started the whole thing. And then I started to really focus on wine and spirits only, and my business grew, and we were at one point we're like 14 employees, but then we scaled the company on purpose back and only worked in wine and spirits. We had some other like manufacturing and consumer products kind of clients that just didn't really fit that mold. And and so now we're like a team of 7, and I'm the creative director, and we handle everything from packaging design, new brand launches, and probably launched over 200 wine brands in the last 15 years. I would say, and some really small ones, some really big ones. I mean, I have some clients that probably every one of your listeners knows that are selling 2 million cases of wine in a supermarket, and then we have some small ones that you can only get by allocation, that you can't even buy just regularly, and the wine costs $280, and most expensive packaging we ever designed is like the bottle sells, a standard 750 milliliter bottle sells for $650. And the cheapest wine we have ever been involved with sells for $2.
Nice.
So,
nice.
Nice.
So from a creative process, which part is your favorite in doing something like that? When you meet with a new client, what part are you the most excited about taking on?
It's the packaging, it's the label, because that is essentially where everything starts with. That's where your image begins. It is your packaging, it's your label. That's what gets the most exposure. Mm-hmm. Because you're putting that on every bottle of your wine brand.
And it's something that doesn't change, right? It's not something temporarily. I mean, you update it, but the label is the logo in some respect. I mean, you've got a winery that has often a logo, and then you've got labels being a little bit different. But labels in general, year over year, don't really change much. So they are super important.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the label, if you have like a very old world feeling, traditional conservative label, well, then you probably can't have like a super hip and cool and modern website, because it just doesn't work together, So the label is really the driving factor of everything, where it all starts, whereas a website, you have a little bit more leeway. You can go a little bit left and right, of your brand, and get a little bit off track with your brand standards, and plus a website. I mean, you obviously know that you work in web design. Trends are still changing so much, and technology, it's just still such a new industry, that, you build a website, and like 3 years later, it's kind of outdated, and there's a new shopping platform, and there's new code and new requirements, and just there's so many changes still, that a website is sort of a ongoing project. Versus your label, in an ideal world, you don't really want to change it.
Yeah, you don't change it for a specific winery, but trends do happen, right? I mean, the labels that you're designing now are different to the labels to 10 years ago. I mean, the demands from the customer, or the ideas, how they want their wine to be represented or positioned or so. I mean, it does change, right?
Yeah, and that depends on, that's different from client to client. If you're spending $80 million on buying vineyards and building a beautiful tasting room and winery facility, you're probably in for the long game, so you're not chasing trends. So you're not going to design your label based on what's really hot right now. And we have a lot of those kind of clients who are in it for the long run, and they want something timeless that still works in 10 years, right? So that's a little different versus some of our clients who produce a lot of wine and sell it mostly in a supermarket environment. You're talking $8 to $16 price point, and they don't build brands for longevity. They build brands that work right now and work maybe for 2 or 3 years, and in 2 years they pull that brand off the shelf and use that same wine for a new brand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so there's we have some clients, they own like 50, 60 different wine brands, and they kind of rotate them, and they say, yeah, no one cares about this brand A anymore, so let's just kill it and redesign the packaging and come out with a new brand. And those are more of the wines that you find in like a supermarket environment at like a Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and Save On, Safeway, those kind of places. And they change constantly. And with those, you want to be trendy because they're chasing what's really hot right now,
It is interesting because that's what the wine industry is very split, right? You've got on one side the wine industry being seemingly a very sort of traditional homegrown stodgy business that there's a winery that has a plot of land and they make some wine, but there's obviously a commercialization in all of this that dramatically changes the way wine is sold, right? And it's not all for better or for worse, right? I mean, it is somewhat what it is. If you're working in the wine industry, do you ever drink wine that is not produced by your labels that you work for, or is that one of the perks of the business, that all of the wine that you're drinking is essentially stuff that they give you to do you write that in your contract? You require 2 cases of all the wine that you're producing in order to come up with a good label. You need to taste it.
Yeah, so we do get a good share of samples, that's like it's just like any industry, I mean, I have a friend who's like a shoe buyer in one of the largest running retailer. And I mean, the guy has like a closet full of running shoes because he gets so many samples to test, right? And so it's similar with us. So yes, we always have a lot of wine in the office, and I have a lot of wine at home that is given to us because we get samples when we do a new label. And then a lot of our clients, they're like, we'll do a project and we do them a favor because we rush it and we meet that deadline or something. And they're like, hey, here's a little thank you. And they ship us a case of wine, and we usually share it around the office and I take some. And so most of the wine I drink is from our clients. And the good thing is that probably 70% of our clients are definitely in the higher quality, higher price point wine. I mean, we're talking like $30 up, So I sometimes feel bad because I'm like, I just feel like a glass of wine, and it's like Thursday night to watch some TV, and I can just afford popping open like an $80 bottle of wine, just because it's Thursday night and I feel like a glass of wine. I'm sometimes like, man, that's pretty crazy that I can do that, but it's because I didn't have to pay for the wine, But yeah, so I generally don't buy wine because it's hard because I get so much wine for free. So it's hard if we're somewhere on vacation or something and we go to the market and it's like, oh, let's buy a bottle of wine. I'm like, oh man, I have so much good wine at home.
This is an interesting tradition because you are a very interesting runner beyond because you're not running full time, and because you're very active on Instagram, and so you are a little bit of a sponsored athlete, but not full-time sponsor. And based on your Instagram work, you're a little bit of an influencer, but you are not 18 years old. So you find yourself in an interesting pocket. And just like with the wine that you get for free, you get a lot of product for free. And so you have these relationships that you're building, but you're not relying on them to feed your family. So it's a little bit of an unique position. Speak a little bit about why you even doing it, because you have a full-time job. You wouldn't need these brand relationships, but you're choosing them. And yeah, I've got millions of questions in regard to that.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's fair enough. Yeah, since I mean Instagram, I think that's obviously how we met, and I do have a fairly good Instagram presence, and it's interesting because I've never been really that big into social media, and I'm like, hardly at all on Facebook these days, especially these days with all the hate on Facebook. I mean, it's sickening going onto Facebook. But Instagram it's a little more fun because people generally post like good vibes, most of the time, and not too much political stuff. At least the people that I'm following, and so I had what. Since I was a pretty good runner, I've been on a sponsored team most of my running life when I was younger. I mean, gotta keep in mind I'm 53, like you said, I'm not a teenager, and so I just got into that habit that it's kind of fun to be part of like an organized, sponsored team, not necessarily a club where you just join the club, something where you actually have to get selected to be on the team. And I've been on the La Sportiva mountain running team for like 13 years. And then last year I made the switch, and now I'm on the Rapid Trail Elite team. And it's just it helps me a lot with motivating myself because there's a little bit of a responsibility to your sponsor, at least that's how I feel. And so that's kind of cool. So so I'm like on several like sponsor teams, and that's really cool, especially at my age, to still get selected, which is a whole nother thing we should elaborate on a little bit, is age group running, and how that is. I think that's one of the really, underappreciated fields of running. When you look at guys who are like, call it like in their 50s, I think masters running starts officially at 40. But I think I had some of my best running years in my early 40s. I think it really gets tough at age 50 and older, and there's some people out there who are like still running amazing times, and I feel they don't get enough credit for that from sponsors or from publications, but that's a whole different subject. So anyway, back to Instagram. I had hip surgery about 6 years ago, and I actually wanted to have sort of a diary about my comeback from my hip injury and surgery. And so my son said, well, why don't you start an Instagram account and post on it? And then it just sort of turned into this thing where people liked it, and they were like, wow, you had this hip surgery, now you're running again. And so over the years, my following grew to, I think it's around 16,000 followers. And what I've noticed, when I hit about 15,000 followers, I started getting all those requests from like random companies, like, hey, do you want to like promote this on your Instagram and you get something for free, or sometimes you even get paid $100, And so for me, it has become just sort of like a little hobby, I would say, I'm not, and the good thing is, like you said, I have my job. I don't depend on getting a free watch or getting a pair of free running shorts or whatever it is, So I'm very selective. I mean, I get like plenty of requests where I'm like, you know what, I'm not interested in this. Another thing I don't do is I don't do any posting for like commission, because I don't want to be a sales rep. A lot of those influencer things is like, hey, here, we send you a free product and you post about it, and then we give you a special code, and if someone buys it, you get 10%. So, okay, so now I'm like saying, hey, buy this t-shirt, and then like if one of my followers buys it, out of the $30 purchase price, I get like $3. That's not worth it for me, especially since I don't depend on the income, to sort of ruin my Instagram followers by constantly bombarding them with some sort of advertisement. So usually if someone contacts me, I say, you know what, send me your product, and if I like it, then we can talk about working together, whatever that is, but I'm not interested in commission. And like an example, that's how I work with Medterra. They make CBD products, and I love their like creams and tinctures and stuff. and most of their influencers, they're like commission based. They gave them products and then they get commission. I just get products that I need and then I talk about them. So it's more of like a traditional sponsorship, and that's the only way I work with companies.
And so you're basically doing it as a fun side hobby, and
Yeah.
I'm projecting myself into you, but working in advertising and marketing, I think it comes fairly natural to want to do something like that, and that's why it might not feel like a burden, because it is a lot more work to have these kind of business relationships and try out products and stuff, right? I mean, there's an aspect to it that is all hidden, that you don't see, that goes beyond, you have to apply to be on these running teams. There's a commitment to it and stuff, right? So there's more to it than posting about it once a month.
Yeah, initially, yes. Until you have that relationship, and hopefully it's like a long-lasting relationship, like ultimate direction, running vests and packs and stuff, like I've been on their team for several years, and just yesterday I got my contract renewal for next year. I don't have to apply again. It's kind of like, yeah, hey, we want to keep working with you. But I've been in photo shoots for them, and for me, I think it's interesting. I get a lot of motivation out of it. It's my Instagram account has become. It has created some interesting dynamics that I never really thought about when I started it. I get so many DMs and comments about people who say like, wow, this is so inspiring that you're 53 years old and you're still so committed. You're still out there. You're still doing track workouts. You're still doing hard workouts. You're still running really fast. And I want to be like you when I'm 53. I'm like 33 and I wish I could be as fast as you. I want to be like you when I'm 53. And I never really thought that I would be inspiring people with my own running. I thought maybe my kids get inspired by my own running. I try to be a role model for them, but I never thought that I would be inspiring to hundreds of grown-ups, who sent me DMs, and that's in one way very cool, and it's very exciting, and for me it's very motivating. It helps me when I feel like, you know what, maybe it's just time to quit running, or when you have one of those down moments where it's like, you know what, people are getting inspired by you not quitting, so don't quit. It's so it has those weird dynamics. My Instagram account has become this almost its little life on its own.
Since we know about social media, do you worry about Facebook changing the algorithm and all of a sudden sort of the connection is gone, since I'm assuming most of your traction is all on Instagram, that it's sort of a one funnel game you play?
You know what? I'm not too concerned about that stuff, because again, it's not like I have like 2 million followers and my livelihood depends on it. It's like, I think it's a cool thing, but if I wouldn't have Instagram, yeah, I would miss the interaction with some of like, I call it my regulars, the people that out of the 16,000 followers I have, there's probably like maybe 50 to 100 that I personally know in a way through Instagram, because they always comment, they always send me DMs, they ask me, hey, what do you think? I've done this in my training. Do you think that's a good idea? They ask me for advice. And so I would miss that interaction. But other than that, I don't really think I would really miss Instagram much if it would go away. So I'm not really too concerned about what the Facebooks of the world are doing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. I mean, I remember the internet before social media, and people were always saying, you need to own your own platform, and you need to have a website and you need to rack traffic. I grew up in the blogging days where it was important to own that aspect. And so I've always been very leery of using these social media platforms, even though it's easy to build a following because everybody is on these platforms. I've been leery of investing too much into it because I always feel like it's fleeting and you don't really own, right? I mean, all the I see people, especially younger people, who take photos directly in Instagram with the Instagram camera that they are not even saving to the camera roll. And it breaks my heart because I'm always like, no, if you want that picture, it's going to be so low resolution if the only place you ever have it is only posted on Instagram. You need to take it with a proper camera so you own your own content. And so that's my mindset, how I grew up. And so I've always been a little bit nervous about these platforms.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, there's certain things. I usually post like maybe once a week, hardly at all twice a week sometimes. Again, I don't post just to post, so like right now I'm not posting very much because I don't have much really going on right now, I'm running mostly on roads, which is kind of boring, so there's no beautiful trail photos, and um, I don't post too much, and when I post, I always take my photos and then like upload it later, so I'll take a photo this morning on my run, and then I don't stop and write my post while I'm on the run and post it. I wait until I come home and then I look through the photos and pick the best one and then I post, so yeah.
All right.
I agree on that.
So let's talk about trail running and aging, because so here's my intro, and it was the topic that you had written down, and I read a book a few years ago that it was a book by Bear Grylls, that British explorer, TV personality, adventurer. He talked about climbing Mount Everest, and in it he wrote, because I think at the time that he climbed Mount Everest, he was the youngest person who had climbed Mount Everest. And he was saying that the average age of people climbing Mount Everest is in their 50s. And that sort of blew my mind because I grew up, like probably most of us, thinking that at the age of 25, you physically peak because that's when most of the professional athletes sort of start looking at winding down their careers if they're playing soccer or whatever. And so I thought of that sport's over when you hit your late 30s and 40s or so. And I think trail running is interesting because, I don't know, why is it? Is it that there's less of a competitive focus? So the top runners in a physical peak aren't actually running on trails, and so older guys still have competitive ability? Or is it that the sport requires more than athleticism and requires endurance in ways that leans itself more to mountaineering than to actually just straight up athleticism that allows older runners to still compete in such high levels?
Yeah, well, I think we have to differentiate here. When you say trail running, we're talking ultra distance, right? We're talking 50 mile, 100 mile, 100K kind of distances. Because obviously if you look at trail running, and you look at like more like typical sky racing, mountain running, like 12K with like 4,000 feet of vertical, like sky running stuff in Europe, those kind of things you don't see very many 40-year-olds in those races, which are technically trail races as well.
Okay.
It's definitely more in the ultra scene. I think there's a couple of things to that. I would say overall competitiveness, because the sport, even so booming, and there are more money coming in and more guys like Jim coming in, like Jim Walmsley, who are like have a background in fast track running. Like I'm like I'm like a 109 half marathon guy. And when I got into the sport of trail ultra running, people were freaking out about how fast I was. That was like 15 years ago. I was like one of the guys that was like smoking fast, because at that time, people dominating like the trail ultra scene was like Scott Jurek. And I don't know what his half marathon PR is, but I would bet it's not any faster than a 112 or 113. And here I came in being a 109 half marathon guy, and people were like freaking out about this fast guy because I had 31 minute 10K, 109 half marathon. And nowadays, people coming into sport like a Jim Walmsley kind of a runner, that break into the sport every day. There's a new one of them. I mean, you're talking like 28 minute 10K, 102 half marathon guys, so even with those faster guys coming in, it's still a very small amount of guys that are that fast. If you look at a lot of races, like, yeah, the top 10 are really fast, but then like the 15th place is really not that fast. Unless obviously there's like the top of the top races, and I think that's why if I go to a race that's not necessarily like a Western States or Lake Sonoma or whatever top A level kind of a race, I mean, I can go and like, yeah, I'm not going to get top 5, but I'm going to get like 14th, So I think the sport has gotten more competitive at the very top end, but it also drops relatively quickly. And in the past, we didn't even have that top end as much. So that's why in the past, a lot of guys, they became ultra runners when they were done with their competitive road running, which was older anyway. So they were done running road marathons and they're like 37, and now they're dabbling into trail 100 milers at age 40,
And what's unique about our sport, which is very, very few sports actually still or have ever offered, is that even though you are older or not as fast experienced, whatever it may be, you actually do get to toe the line. Like the requirements to get into Western States, aside from the lottery or UTMB, is very much achievable for anyone who can slog the distance and have the time commitment to be able to run for a few years at a level of doing some 100 milers to get the points together in order to get yourself into the lottery. But considering that these are the top events of the sport, I don't think there are many other sports left where you actually get to toe the line with the top athletes in the world, right? This is very unique.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree on that. I mean, there is plenty of road marathons that are still easy to get in, but if you look at like let's say a Boston Marathon, like for my age group, the qualifying time is 3 hours 25, and that's a pretty solid time for a 50-year-old guy, like there's plenty of people who train all their life and dream all their life of making a Boston qualifier just so they can try to get into Boston, versus, yeah, you're right. I mean, getting a Western States qualifier, there's like some races that are like a 100K with like a 17-hour cutoff or something, that's a lot easier than running a Boston qualifier. So yeah, I would say it's a lot more accessible in that way. But then obviously due to the limitations of permits and how many people can you have on a trail, it's sometimes still a lot harder to get into the actual race after all,
Yeah, wasn't it this year at UTMB that the guy came in second or third, is in his 40s or something? There was some breakout performance this year at UTMB that was very, very surprising from when it comes from an age point of view. I think he's like...
I mean, I think it's the tougher the course, the lesser of a runner you can be. You know, like if you look at like a hard rock, you know, it's like where it involves a lot more power hiking and less running, and it's super technical. You know, where if you can run like a 4:30 mile or a 4-minute mile, doesn't make any difference. You know, because you really, like you said earlier, you have to slug it out and power hike and be good on slow pace and technical terrain. You know, that's different than if you pick like a race, like let's say a JFK 50 miler, where you essentially have like half the race is an easy trail race and then the other half is a road marathon. You know, obviously the guy who's a faster runner, which is most likely also younger, has an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true. So beyond racing, what makes trail running great, and I just had a conversation about this with somebody else, how trail running combines the love for athleticism and sports with actually being in the mountains. And while you spend a lot of time in very focused training exercises, I see your posts running track and really focusing on speed, you actually love being in the mountains and scaling peaks. So not just running circles around them, but actually getting to the top. Tell me a little bit about your mountaineering.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. It's actually, I mean, you know, I don't really consider myself a mountaineer. You know, I'm like one of those people. Well, I guess I should consider myself a mountaineer based on what I'm going to say. You know, when you meet those people and they're like, well, I go jogging 3 times a week for like 4 miles, but I'm not really a runner. Well, you are a runner. You go running 3 times a week, therefore you are a runner. You may be an amateur, you may be slow, you may not train 100-mile weeks, but you are a runner. Because I just want to say I'm not a mountaineer, but I actually, based on that statement, I am a mountaineer because, you know, I'm like, I don't really train for it. I don't live in the mountains. I don't do it all the time, but I love the mountains. And so I've been on several mountain trips. It actually started out with my kids. I wanted to do more stuff that we can do together. And so we got into backpacking, and I did a bunch of like through hikes and multi-day trips. I through hiked the Tahoe Rim Trail with my son Dylan when he was 12. And then that turned into like, oh, maybe we should pick something more challenging. And it's like, okay, well, let's summit Mount Whitney. And then we did that. And then my younger son, Luke, he really got more into, hey, let's do a real mountain. And so next thing, we signed up and we had crampons on and were on a rope team and summited Mount Baker in your neck of the woods there, you know. Yeah. And next thing, we're like on an airplane to Kilimanjaro. And suddenly we're like hiking to Everest Basecamp in Nepal. And so it kind of snowballed a little bit. And so since then I've been to like, you know, Mount Elbrus and Cotopaxi in Ecuador, and actually just signed up for a trip to, I'm going to go by myself, not with my son because he has school. But in February, I'm going to Argentina to attempt Aconcagua. And nice. So I kind of just stumbled into that, and I was always fascinated. I have no plans on ever climbing Mount Everest, but I'm kind of fascinated by the whole good and bad and beauty and ugly of Mount Everest, you know, with like, is it overly touristy? Should, you know, all the issues and pros and cons with Everest. I'm really fascinated and I love following that scene. So I'm more a little bit of like the amateur couch potato follower, you know, and where it's good for me, I'm obviously, as you can tell, based on my running resume and me still chasing the dream at age 53, I'm very competitive if it comes to running, because I was always very good but not over the top good. I was always like at this sort of bottom of elite. I say I was like never good enough to be really good, but always too good to be bad. And I would get into an elite field and get invited to an elite race, but I would never make prize money. And so I think part of me still has that competitive drive in me. And I'm still really good for my age now, and so I'm still have that. I want to try and break an age group national record. And so I'm always like, I got into ultra running because I wanted to do something where I'm not competitive, where I don't chase a time or win or rank or anything, because that's what I always did in track and road running. And then I started ultra running and bam, I was good again. So suddenly I was in the same rat race where I'm chasing times and rankings and podiums, And with mountaineering, I don't have that. I don't care. I just want to get to the top. I don't care if I'm in a group of 10, if I'm in the slow group or the fast group. I really don't care. I just want to get to the top and say, hey, I summited Aconcagua. And at the end, no one asks. If you tell someone, hey, I ran Boston Marathon, they can be like, oh, what was your time? If you say, I summited Aconcagua, no one going to ask your time.
Well, if you're Killian, they would ask you, but in general, they wouldn't.
Yeah, and so that's one of the most enjoyable things about the whole mountaineering thing is it's not competitive. I mean, it's competitive in a way like, yes, I want to summit. I don't want to go there and not make it, right? And there's obviously always a chance of not making it due to whatever weather, high altitude sickness, or whatever it might be, but there's no time goal. There's really just making it.
Yeah.
And
and that's
I think what I like about
it. And the beauty of trail running and continuous training is that it enables you to actually being able to do mountaineering objectives like this, because for a lot of people who want to get into that and don't do regular training and exercising like this, they start from a completely different base level. When for you, you're able to physically handle it, which in many ways was my big motivation to even get into running. I went hiking and didn't after years of building a business and feeling very sedentary, and realized that I didn't like who I was on a trail and how I performed just hiking, and realized I needed to do something in order to get myself into shape. And I think that was for me my big motivator to get into running, was I want to see mountains and I want to experience that. And once you have that baseline, then it doesn't become this daunting task of how do I get from couch to the top of Mount Everest, which a lot of people in their 50s probably buy themselves their way into it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely have an advantage. I mean, like, if you look at a trip and you, let's say, like, you have like a summit day and you have to get up at midnight and leave at 1:00, and you have like a 15-hour slog where you're gonna feel like throwing up at one point and you're completely exhausted and you have a headlamp on, and that's like, sounds like 100-mile run to me, right? So obviously going into those trips, I have that advantage versus a guy who prepares by hiking every weekend for 3 or 4 hours with a backpack. I have that grittiness and grind that you need, and I have that experience. I'm not gonna like say, "Are we home yet?" because we've been on the trail for 12 hours. That definitely helps with those mountain trips. And for me, it's something that I sort of stumbled into because, like I said earlier, I was hiking with my kids, and then Luke wanted to do something more challenging, and then Luke was the one who was like, hey, let's hike together to Everest Basecamp. And he was like, I think he was at the time 11. And so my 11-year-old son and I, flew to Nepal, and just that whole thing. I mean, that's something that he will tell his kids and his grandkids about, how he went with his dad as an 11-year-old to Nepal, and we flew into Lukla, and we hiked to Everest Base Camp, and we spent 2 nights there. And those are like stories of a lifetime, independent from those are just so much bigger than like, hey, I ran like a 2-hour 20 marathon, or I ran like a 17-hour 100 miler. Those are just so much bigger of lifetime memories with someone that close to you, like your son, and that's the cool thing about it. And that's really how I got into this. And now it has become this kind of thing, like I said, where it's a nice outlet for me to do something in the mountains that's beautiful, that's real similar to running a 100-miler without having that pressure of a 100-miler with some goal, whatever it is, sub 24 hours, sub 20 hours, podium, top 10, whatever the goal might be, So, plus you get to travel to a little bit more exotic places. I mean, I guess you could do that with running 100-milers too. I guess you can always travel to a 100-miler wherever you want to do. So
yeah, I've enjoyed traveling to races. I've enjoyed that part of sort of taking the family to a place, and then I do a race, and hopefully not die or DNF, so I'm grumpy afterwards, and the family gets a vacation out of it, and I get to race. So no, this ability to sort of combine vacation with these kind of adventures, these experiences, or the other way around, combine these experiences with also seeing exotic places or different places, is what makes life beautiful, for sure.
Yeah. With the mountain trip, the nice thing about with this mountain trip, it's a little less pressure, because like if you go to a race, there's always a certain expectation. Even if you're back of the pack guy, your expectations are cutoffs to not get cut off the course, or there's always expectations. You may be a little bit out of your league. It may be your first 100-miler, and so you're like, I want to finish this thing and make the cutoffs. And there's always expectations. And I feel with those mountain trips, yeah, there's the expectations of summit, but to me it feels a little less pressure. I mean, this is gonna be an awesome trip. Like Luke and I, we went to Mount Elbrus in Russia, and that was kind of a really cool trip. We were in Moscow, we saw all this stuff, It's a longer trip. It feels a little less pressure than a race.
Than putting a bib on. On the other side, I would argue what's great about a race is that it gives you the safety. Because if you're mountaineering, there's a level of risk involved that trail races in general don't have. And that's one other thing that makes races fairly safe environment, right? Where in mountaineering you sort of move yourself into a place where you risk your life in some way or another, right?
It's a little bigger unknown than in a race. I would agree on that. And the beauty about a race, like if you bring your family, the family can be involved at most races. Maybe some it's a little tougher than others, but like most races, you have at least 3 or 4 aid stations where the family can easily go to. They can drive there with the car and crew for you and cheer you on, and you can see your kids, and you can run over the finish line with your kids, which are special moments, which obviously you don't have that in mountaineering. It's not like when I'm climbing Aconcagua, my wife and my 2 boys gonna be like 2 miles from the summit cheering me on,
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
So Obviously that's the nice thing about a race, involving the family. So
for sure. So, final question, final topic. The other very nice thing about life is food. You're from Germany. You gotta tell me your favorite German food. A, that you love. B, that you only get when eating in Germany. And C, what you eat over here in order to preserve your German memory, I guess. Yeah, let's talk about food.
okay, so the funny thing, my favorite food when we're in Germany, you're gonna get a good laugh out of that I like to eat mostly there is actually not German food.
Is it Döner Kebab?
It's Döner and it's Greek food.
Yeah.
I love gyros. That's like one of my favorite things. So when we're in Germany, like usually the first day we go there, we go to the same Greek restaurant. So it's kind of funny that way that the favorite thing and what I eat probably most in Germany is Turkish or Greek food.
I think that makes very much sense, right? Because the Mediterranean food in Germany is comparable to the Mexican food in the US. And I think many Americans would say that their favorite food is Mexican. And so I think that's the good comparison. My wife loves doner too. I think every time we're over there, we have to eat several of them for sure. Yeah,
so that's kind of funny. And I think part of that is also like, I mean, I know you cook quite a bit at home, and a lot of the typical German dishes, they're so simple and easy to make in general that I make them here all the time. I mean, we have like schnitzel once a week or every other week, you know, we make goulash and, you know, one of my, kids' favorite things is so this is I don't know if you have that where you're from, but it's called Schinken Eier Nudeln.
Okay.
You ever heard that? You never heard that term, I assume.
Put it together and see. I mean, based on the words, I can figure out what it is. But
yeah, so it's kind of from where I'm from, our version essentially of like spaghetti carbonara.
Okay.
So I grew up with that, and it's kind of a leftover meal. So growing up, essentially on Sunday we had like, you know, like a big roast with like brown gravy sauce and egg noodles, right? And then on Monday you have all those leftover noodles. And so what you do is you throw them in a pan with some butter and some bacon, and then you just crack an egg over it. And therefore the name, Schinken Eier Nudeln.
Perfect.
Right? And it's like, this has become over the years my pre-race meal, because it's kind of, you know, has some protein, some fat, some carbohydrates, you know. And so that has become a staple in our family. And like my son, he's like both of them ran high school cross country, and it has always become their like pre-race meal as well, you know. And so that's kind of a staple that we always make at home here. Just kind of a funny kind of a dish, you know. But then I would say, if you ask my boys, you're gonna like that. One of their favorite things is Spätzle.
Oh yeah,
they love Spätzle, you know, which obviously is like from your neck of the woods. So
yeah, I had to figure out a way of making them myself, because I didn't want to pay the prices for the import Spätzle over here, and so I make it myself, and my family loves them too. I actually watched because for years I tried to trying to make them as thin as possible, and then I watched some video of some German TV chef who was saying that who was showing how to make spätzle, and he was talking about how he grew up with his mom always making them from scratch, and when she made them during the week, she made really thick ones because she just wanted to be quick and she needed a quick meal, and she didn't want to try to make them thin and fine and special and stuff, and the family always loved it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have to be for a weekday meal, I don't have to be all like try to be all fancy, and so now I make them a lot more often because it's so fast. So yeah, Spätzle is definitely
where you just scrape them off like a cutting board.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, my German family thinks I'm crazy about all the food that I'm cooking and baking over here, and it's interesting because partially I do it because I just don't have it available, right? I mean, I bake my own pretzels because you just can't get pretzels over here. And I mean, if I'd live in Germany, I would have never started that hobby of cooking and baking because things would be just so much more easily available to get, right?
Yeah. Another thing that we do a lot at home, well, I want to say every maybe 3 weeks, at least once a month, that's a very typical German thing, is raclette.
Oh, yes. It's Swiss, but Germans love it so much that...
Exactly.
Yeah, no, exactly. We just bought a raclette grill this last holiday season. For us, we did fondue for many of the special sort of family get-togethers. That wasn't Thanksgiving because I can't mess with my wife's Thanksgiving plans. I've tried to like bring some German influences in, and I've won with Rotkohl. I'm able to make braised red cabbage and bring that to Thanksgiving, but everything else has to be very classic. But for all the other holidays, we have always done fondue and recently raclette, for sure. Well, very, very cool. That sounds all super delicious. Thomas.
Yeah, now I'm hungry.
Right? No, me too. I'm like, okay, so now we need to find a döner somewhere close by. It's interesting. I've done some research trying to figure out why kebabs taste so bad over here, and it has something to do with the way they pack the meat around the rotisserie stick. Like there is some kind of FDA regulation that essentially lets Americans only do ground beef or ground meat, and it doesn't get the same level of sort of fat content and crispy bits than the way the döners are made classically in Germany. And even though it is a Turkish dish, we should point out that döner was actually sort of made popular as a fast food item in Berlin, so it's sort of German.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has been like very well integrated. Like you said, it's like Mexican food in California. You know, I mean, it's like probably considered an American food, not like, you know. So
it is, and in the same way, you always know that if you want real Mexican food, you have to eat it from Mexicans. You can't eat it from white Americans in the same way it's with döner. Yeah. It's fully integrated into German culture, but I don't think any white German would dare to make döner. It has to be made by Turkish immigrants, right?
Yeah.
All right. So before I let you go, tell our listeners some links. If you want to mention some of your sponsors, give them something where they can find you, hear about you. Definitely Instagram. You've mentioned how you like to connect with folks there, so let them know some of your presence online.
Yeah, so I have my athlete website, which is just thomasreiss.com, and it's ThomasReiss.com. And and there's links. There's like all my sponsors are there. There's links to my Instagram. You can find me on Instagram. It's thomas.rei55.
Perfect. We'll have all those links in the show notes for folks.
So I'm mostly active on Instagram.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to grab your Singletrack shirt and be nice to each other. Until next week.